My mother sold my childhood memories like junk at a flea market and now thinks she can just live on like nothing happened. But she has no idea that her little secret is out, and I'm holding all the cards. When they came for her, her life crumbled as fast as she destroyed mine. And trust me, this was just the beginning. My name is Sizke, I'm 22, and I just found out that my mother sold my childhood memories. Yes, you heard that right. And it sounds just as strange as it actually is. Imagine this. I come home after another dull day, ready to crash on my bed and let out a sigh. But then I notice that my room is as empty as my neighbor's head. Everything is gone. Diaries, toys, albums. It's as if someone decided to erase my past with an eraser. I walk into the kitchen, and there's my mother, Linda. She's 45 and always so sure she knows best. I sit down, look at her, and ask, "Hey, have you seen my stuff by any chance? Everything's gone." Without batting an eye, she responds, "I sold it, had some debts to pay." I thought my head was about to explode. "What do you mean you sold it? My stuff for debts? Are you serious?" And she, calmly as ever, says, "Well, yeah, it was old anyway, and we needed the money." Wow, what a trade, my childhood for a few green bills. You should have seen her face. It was like she was talking about something totally normal. I couldn't believe my ears. Is this even normal? To just sell someone else's memories like junk at a flea market? I was genuinely panicking. All those things were part of me. There were my first drawings, photos, all my toys that I couldn't throw away. They reminded me of who I am and where I came from. And now, goodbye, past. Everything sold to cover some credit card debts. And you know what hurts the most? She doesn't even care. I felt like I was in some ridiculous dream. She didn't see anything wrong with it. "Just old stuff," she said, like it was all trash. How's that for a twist of fate? Part 2. The Inner Conflict. It was like an explosion inside me. Imagine someone erasing your entire life like a mistake in a school essay. Just like that, with one swift move. And I'm not exaggerating. Everything that defined me was sold off like junk at a garage sale. I literally lost a piece of my soul. And who do you think is responsible for that? My mother. Sitting across from me, like she'd just paid off a new car and couldn't care less about what she had done. I was on the edge. Anger, shock, and even more anger. I mean, seriously, how can someone be so detached? These weren't just old toys or photos, they were my past, my memories. But to her, it was just stuff to trade for a few bucks. The phrase kept spinning in my head. "Are you freaking kidding me? That's my damn childhood." I was about to throw it all in her face, but somehow held back. Don't ask me how. But my hands, they didn't know what to do. They were shaking like I'd just gotten off the tallest roller coaster in the country. I was desperate to break something. And then there she was, looking at me like she didn't understand why I was even bringing it up. "Just old stuff," she'd said. How could someone be so heartless? It felt like a knife in the back. No, not quite. It was more like a sledgehammer to the head. Sudden, brutal, and right to the heart. I tried to calm the shaking, clenched my teeth, but my thoughts were spiraling like I was trapped in some cheap horror movie. Except, instead of running out of the theater, I was stuck in my seat, forced to watch. The script was worse than terrible. Slowly, questions started popping up in my head. What if this sale was just the tip of the iceberg? My mother was never a saint, but to sell off my past to pay debts? Something wasn't adding up. And then it hit me. What if it wasn't just about the money? A few days passed, and I made a decision. Enough is enough. How long was I supposed to tolerate this circus? After she sold off my past for cash, I stopped talking to her. Full-on cold shoulder. Works almost like a cold shower. She tried to talk to me, but I just nodded coldly, pretending to listen. But one day, while she was at work, I came up with a plan. Sneak into her room. Not that I liked playing detective, but something was bothering me. I had this feeling that the sale of my memories was just the beginning. And you know, when you've got an itch, you have to scratch it. So I snuck into her room, feeling like I was in some detective show. I started rummaging through her drawers like a pro, And bam, there it was. I found her old phone, looked like it hadn't been used since the days of dial-up internet, but my time wasn't wasted. The first conversation I opened made it clear that things weren't as simple as they seemed. Turns out my sweet mother had been involved in some shady stuff for a long time. I wasn't even surprised when I saw messages from some sketchy guy calling himself the Serious Man. What a name. Really inspires trust, right? It took me a few minutes to understand the scale of the disaster. Turns out, my mother owed this man a ton of money, and now he was pressuring her. And you know what the kicker is? These debts weren't just credit card stuff like she told me. No, this was real, pure criminal activity. I started doubting that coffee maker was ever part of the plan. It was probably just a distraction from the real drama. I kept digging, and that's when things got really crazy. Turns out, my mother wasn't just caught up in this mess. She was helping this guy hide from the police, covering for him like an old cozy winter sweater. Before I could even process it, I realized she wasn't just neck deep in this mess. She was completely drowning in it. Everything started to make sense. Her strange behavior, her indifference to everything, even the stupid sale of my past. It was all part of her secret criminal life. How about that? My mom, a legit criminal, just with a coffee maker instead of a gun. The moment of truth hit at the worst possible time. Picture this. I'm sitting on her bed like a boss, holding her old phone, feeling like James Bond who's just uncovered the villain's lair. And then she walks in. I was ready for the scenario. Yelling, tears, Oscar-level drama, like, how could you, Tom, invade my personal life? But what do you think happened? None of that. She just stood there in the doorway, looked at me, and smiled. Yep, smiled. Like it was just a regular scene, and I'd just discovered a Christmas gift. For a second, I thought I was in some ridiculous soap opera, but then her words snapped me back to reality. You know too much, Tom. Maybe you should forget all this, or the consequences won't be pleasant. Seriously? Was that a threat? From my mother? And not just a don't leave your dirty socks on the floor kind of threat? No, it sounded much darker, like she was ready to send me into oblivion if I kept digging. I sat there stunned, and one thought kept circling in my head. Is my mom really threatening her own son? This is some messed up crap. That's when I realized our family drama had gone beyond any typical mold. This wasn't just a case of strict mom and her disobedient son. It was something bigger. My mother wasn't the person I thought she was anymore. Her casual remark, said with a smile, was like a knife in my back, like she was waving off all the years we'd spent together. It became clear to me I was looking at a completely different person. I sat there staring at her, realizing that everything that once connected us, trust, family ties, it was all an illusion. At that moment, I felt completely alone, like a wall had formed around me, separating me from the world where my mother was no longer my mother. She was something else, something much scarier. I closed the door to my room and just collapsed on the bed. My brain was boiling like a kettle on high heat. What now? Go to the police? Yeah, imagine that show. Hi, officers. My mother is the villain from a cheap crime thriller, and she's been helping some guy hide from the cops. Please arrest her. Yeah, sounds fun, but also ridiculous. Tell my friends? Sure, that'd be a great story for Friday Hangouts. Hey guys, you won't believe this. My mom's a real-life mobster, just without the suit and cigar. So, what's the result? 0. I was starting to lose my mind, unable to come up with a reasonable plan. All my thoughts were like tightly stretched strings, ready to snap at any second. And you know what was the worst part? I sat there realizing that I could no longer trust my own mother. It was like a cheap horror movie where the monster isn't some stranger with a hook for a hand, but the person you've known your entire life. Only now that monster had the face of someone you loved. The more I thought about it, the more overwhelmed I became. This woman, the one I used to call Mom, was no longer someone I could protect. I knew she had crossed a line, and long ago. And that's when, sitting in my room, I made my decision. Enough. I wasn't going to protect her anymore. Yeah, she gave me life. But that didn't mean I had to keep turning a blind eye to her actions. I felt like the protagonist of a movie, deciding to cut all ties with the past and wage war against the person who had once been closest to him. Something shifted inside me. She was no longer my mother. No way. I now saw her not as family, but as an enemy, and that strange feeling of freedom, it hit me hard. The weight on my soul lifted a little. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but one thing was certain. We were on different sides now. All right, if I was going to play this game, I was going to play big. I started gathering evidence. Messages, phone call records, pictures with shady guys who looked like they belonged in crime dramas, but not as the leads. More like the guys who get killed first. It was my own personal quest, and honestly, I was starting to enjoy it. The more I dug, the more I realized this wasn't just a small debt problem. My mother was knee-deep in criminal activity, and it wasn't just selling stolen coffee makers on the black market. This was serious stuff. At first, I thought she'd just gotten into debt and was trying to dig herself out. But when you find pictures of her standing next to guys who look like they've spent years in prison, you start to realize your mother isn't someone who just made a mistake. Turns out, my mom had been living a double life, like a bad spy from the movies, only without the gadgets and cool cars. And you know what's the strangest part? It didn't horrify me. On the contrary, I felt like the hero of some dark thriller with black humor, like I'd been given a role in a movie, and I had to play it right. And the more evidence I found, the more I enjoyed this crap. It was a twisted, bitter kind of fun. The phone call recordings were a whole other level. Have you ever heard your mother negotiating with someone who sounds like they've just escaped from a crime thriller? "Yeah, I'll get the money, don't worry," she'd say so casually, like she was arranging a coffee date. Listening to it, I couldn't believe this was the same woman who once told me not to curse around her. Oh, the irony, right? And the more I dug, the clearer it became. I had one goal now, to turn her in. Yeah, it sounds like something out of a movie, but I was seriously planning to hand my own mother over to the police. Let her face the full consequences of her choices. I was at my breaking point and knew one thing for sure. If she'd chosen to be part of this criminal world, she was going to pay for it. And damn it, I was starting to look forward to seeing how it would all end. Night fell, the night when everything was going to change. I sat in the kitchen across from my mother, and in my pocket was a flash drive with all the evidence. We sat there like nothing was happening. She sipped her tea, and I absent-mindedly sipped my coffee. To an outsider, the scene would have seemed normal, but not to me. For me, it was the final act, where I sat across from someone I no longer knew. She was calm, too calm, smiling, talking about how she found a new discount on her favorite coffee maker, and I looked at her like a ghost, unaware that her time in this world was about to end. We both knew there was a chasm between us, but she was too caught up in her concerns to notice. I found it strange how relaxed she could be. In a few hours, her life was going to change forever, and not for the better. And there I sat, trying to suppress the wave of doubt. Damn, 100 questions were swirling in my head. "Tom, are you sure you're doing the right thing? After all, she's your mother." Yeah, mother. But the mother who sold my past like old junk. The mother who threatened me when I found out about her shady dealings. I knew I had to see this through, but something inside me still hurt. As she kept talking about her shopping, I remembered all the things she destroyed, everything that mattered to me. My childhood, my memories, our family warmth. She sold it all for a few green bills. Money spent on her debts and dirty business. How could I possibly still respect her after that? Her voice was distant, like background noise I could no longer process. I looked at her and thought about how our relationship had turned into this farce. No more love, no more attachment, just emptiness and resentment. She had destroyed everything we had, and now I was going to put the final nail in the coffin. And there I sat, clutching that damn flash drive in my pocket, knowing this was the end. Not just for her, but for both of us. In a few hours, I'd hand over all the evidence to the police, and her quiet life would be over. My mind finally went quiet. All the doubts disappeared. I no longer felt guilt, only relief. The next day, it was over. I gave the flash drive to the police, and they didn't waste any time. That very morning, before my mother could finish her coffee, the cops showed up at the door. The scene looked like something from a TV show, only without the epic music. They stood at the door, and she, completely baffled. When she realized what was happening, her face twisted in shock. Honestly, At that moment, something clicked inside me. Instead of feeling something like shame or guilt, I felt sinister satisfaction. It was like that moment when you watch a firework rocket shoot up, knowing it's about to go boom. As they cuffed her, I stood nearby, watching. A strange smirk played on my face. And you know what? I liked it. It wasn't that stupid grin of someone who orchestrated everything for revenge. No, it was something darker, almost twisted, like I'd just watched the final act of some creepy show, and this ending was completely deserved. She yelled something at me as they took her away. I didn't catch it, nor did I care to. It didn't matter anymore. Her words dissolved into the air, and I didn't even turn around. All I felt in that moment was relief. No guilt, no regret, she was nothing to me now. Her voice, her screams, her face, it all ceased to matter. I stood there for a while, just watching as they took her away, realizing that this chapter of my life had closed. All the memories, all the resentment, all the drama, it was over. Sure, the future was uncertain. I didn't know what would happen next, and honestly, I didn't care much. But for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from all the weight she had placed on me. And there was something incredibly sweet about that feeling of freedom.